If your company has a compliance program, then your company needs compliance training. If you want your program to be a success, that training needs to be the best. Join Shawn Rogers and Tom Fox on Excellence in Training and learn just how good compliance training can be.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox and Shawn Rogers back for another episode of Excellence in Training. Today, we're going to explore a question raised by a woman named Rebecca Melcher. She posed a question of what is the future of compliance training. Rebecca is a graduate student in France, I think, and it was looking at compliance training. And I directed her to Shawn, and he answered her question, but he's thought about it quite a bit more. So first of all, Rebecca, thank you for the question. You gave us a podcast topic out of it. And Shawn, thank you for responding to Rebecca and thinking about it. So with that incredibly long-winded introduction, what are your thoughts about the future of compliance training?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I really appreciated Rebecca's question because it gave me the opportunity to sit back and think about where I would like to see compliance training kind of as a visionary over the next several years, maybe even a decade. And I came up with 5 things that I would like to see change when it comes to compliance training. And if I have my way and have the ability to change the world, these are some things that I would try to use as my objectives. The first one that I told Rebecca was that I hope that compliance training will be more respectful of the learner. And what I mean by that is I hear from people all the time that they just click through the training on the online training courses that we require, and that they go because they feel like it's a requirement of the company, and the company's trying to mitigate its liability, and it really isn't too concerned about whether or not the training is effective. And I think that we have a problem with our learner base that they just sometimes think this is an exercise that they have to do because if they don't, they will be punished for it. And so what I mean to be more respectful is I hope that we can find a way to be more respectful of the learner's time and the learner's intellect. And I know of no other training profession or discipline that requires mandatory training on a very regular basis on the exact same learning objectives year over year. If a law school operated that way, you would be in law school forever, and you'd have to take civil procedure every year, which would be horrible. And if you think how torturous that would be, that's how some of our learners feel when they get the same training content year over year. So I'm hoping that we can find a way to make the user aware of what they need to know in an efficient way without giving them the same content over and over. So that was number 1. Number 2 was I hope that compliance training abuse will stop. And I put compliance training abuse in quotes. That's kind of my coined phrase. And by training abuse, I mean the tendency of both companies and sometimes governmental officials to require training courses to address problems that training really is not the best tool to use to solve the problem, but it could just simply give the illusion that something's done. For example, General Motors is an international global company, and plus we operate in every state of the union. And what we're finding it to be hugely challenging is that we're getting state-by-state requirements to do anti-harassment training every single year. And then they give a list of guidelines on how it must be done, whether it's live or online. And then they tell us that they have their own set of objectives. And so pretty soon we're finding ourselves where we're dealing with a dozen different states, all having different requirements. I would prefer that be left to the responsible companies to come up with a training program that addressed harassment in a way that is tailored to that company. And so that's one of the things I mean by training abuse. And the other thing is training is sometimes used as virtue signaling. And what I mean by that is that training sometimes is applied as a PR effort after there's been a major issue and controversy in the media. And, I've used the windshield wiper analogy before. I'll use it again here. Turning on the windshield wipers after you've been in an accident is absolutely useless, but it looks like something's happening with the vehicle. And I think sometimes we have a major incident and we think we need to publicly display our efforts to do training, and it actually becomes punitive to the people that weren't involved in the issue in the first place. And so that's what I call training abuse. Let's find a way to use training where it's going to be truly effective and make the most difference. And I'll pause there to see if you have any comments, because I don't want to keep rambling.
No, you're not rambling. Actually, I think you're on a roll. I guess the comment I would have on the training abuse is that it seems to me, or rather, I was going to say that the government is dictating a level of specificity which may not be the right form of training. It might not lead to the effectiveness that they are looking for. But if I step back a moment and think about how government regulation and enforcement in the FCPA world has really driven innovation in a variety of ways of compliance programs, perhaps that's what this sort of government mandate will do, Shawn. It will drive a level of innovation that we haven't not seen before. Because of the robust nature of what they're requiring. And in a prior podcast, we talked about training frequency, and there you talked about reminders, perhaps presenting data to the regulators, showing them that a variety of forms of training and communication are the most effective tool to keep the issue awareness in front of the people. And I really like that analogy of the windshield wipers the most, because it's keeping the issue issue awareness in front of those who need to be aware of it. So I guess I'm sort of on being a good lawyer. I'm of two minds on the training abuse. It is a level of detail that may be difficult to achieve and or ineffective, but it also the robustness of the government response to Me Too and other corporate and national scandals may drive innovation as well.
I hope it does, and I would hope it would drive some kind of a standard that would allow companies like us to not have to worry that we're going to do training on that topic but still not meet the requirement of individual states, because it becomes very burdensome to manage all the different requirements. So some standards and some best practices that could evolve from this would be very, very helpful.
So what's number 3, Shawn?
Number 3 is I hope that training will become more relevant to learner roles. And what I mean by that, and we've talked about this in prior podcasts, is that there are some elements of ethics and compliance principles that everyone in the company needs to know at a general level, at an awareness level. They need to know we have a code, where we have our policies are located and what the code contains, and they need to know about our hotline and how to report and about non-retaliation. But there are some risks that don't just apply to everyone in the company, and if we can do a better job as a compliance training profession in applying the right level of training to the right level of risk that each individual employee bears, we will come off with a much better practice, and we will make our users realize that they are being targeted because of their risk profile and that they're not wasting their time. So I hope that, and I know this is an evolving issue and we're doing better than we were doing years ago, but I hope the idea of targeting and using adaptive training and using training at the point of compliance risk becomes more permeated throughout our profession. And that kind of leads to number 4, when I said I hope that compliance training becomes more integrated into the business processes. We've talked about this before, but what if we could do micro training that's a minute or 2 long when someone is doing an activity in the company that presents the risk? For example, we mentioned before, what if they're traveling to a high-risk country? Wouldn't it be great if they could have a micro training or a reminder or a refresher right after they did their travel arrangements to say, hey, I see you're going to this country. This country is known for having this issue and this issue, and you're going to be faced with it or could be faced with it. Let me give you a refresher to keep you and the company out of trouble. And so that is what I call the just-in-time model. We're experimenting with that at General Motors, and we're looking at ways to do it better going forward, which will ease some of the burden of the overtraining problem that you get when you just apply training to everybody in the company. And finally, number 5 is like my holy grail. This is where I hope that compliance training becomes more bottom-up driven than top-down driven. And what I would like to see happen is that every manager in the company knows what his employees are doing, knows what compliance risks they bear, and takes on more ownership for making sure their employees are trained, rather than that being driven from the compliance function or the chief compliance officer. But the manager himself or herself knows that there is a situation that my employees are facing, and I want to make sure they are properly trained by the experts. And we have a brief example of that just happened here. We recently got new leadership at one of our locations internationally, and within a few weeks, that new leader had reached out to the compliance function and said, I'm seeing some things here that concern me. Will you bring in some people from Detroit, and we'll supplement them with some regional people? And can we train all of our managers and people leaders on anti-corruption, on trade, and on conflicts of interest? Because I'm concerned that we're going to have a problem. And that was driven not by the compliance function seeing the new leadership and seeing the change happen, but that leader taking ownership for having his employees get trained. And we came up with a one-day event, and we used scenarios, and it was absolutely fantastic, the feedback we got. And so I would like to see compliance training permeate the organization, somewhat like safety has at General Motors, but compliance issues permeate as well, so that we're being asked and invited to come do training rather than mandating it out to the masses. So those are my 5 that I gave Rebecca, and I hope those are insightful and useful.
Well, Shawn, this has been a fascinating exploration of that veiled crystal ball of the future. So we are on the cusp of 2020, so to 2020, 2025 and beyond, perhaps we can work towards some of these goals.
That would be fantastic, Tom, and I hope that you're right along with me as we evangelize these principles.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Excellence in Training. Help get the word out by rating us and leaving a review.